See you later, Sam.
Okay, see ya!
You're watching The Loud House.
And now we get to the show that has often been credited for saving Nickelodeon, The Loud House. Actually, I don't know if that's the half of it. The Loud House has kind of been treated as the second coming, and there's a good reason for that. If you have just joined us and have skipped, like, the past dozen or so reviews, Nickelodeon had been in their doldrums for about a decade. Ever since the year 2006, Nickelodeon has released a bunch of mediocre shows, like Barnyard or Tack and the Power of Juju, and the network as a whole has had a hard time catching up to their original quality. Not helping were shows like Fanboy and Chum Chum, Breadwinners, or Robot and Monsters, shows that it was hard to see any sort of appeal in. Nickelodeon was making mistake after mistake, like refusing Adventure Time, which had become one of their competitors' greatest hits. I had been the most harsh on Nickelodeon since I started reviewing, more so than any other network, because when I started, Nickelodeon was right in the middle of their dark ages. Then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. I mean, everything changed when The Loud House started airing. This show was an immediate success, rivaling and then even surpassing SpongeBob, becoming one of Nickelodeon's most successful cartoons ever. I personally gone on record stating that I really do like this show. I have to admit, though, that The Loud House is just a touch overhyped. Personally, I do think The Loud House is not just a good show, but a great show. But I will admit that it has a lot of problems. But when things are all said and done, I don't know if I'd put this on the list of the greatest Nicktoons ever. Maybe in like a number 10 slot or something of the best Nicktoons ever. It's definitely not in the top 5 or close to number 1. Because this is one of those shows that has a lot of good going for it and a lot of not so good. I will say that this show has a pretty unique concept if you don't watch anime. It's about a single boy, Lincoln Loud, living with his 10 sisters and getting into all kinds of crazy cartoonish shenanigans. You might think that a lot of the episodes are specifically about Lincoln being the only boy in the family of mostly girls, but while those episodes do happen occasionally, the plots are more often about being in a big family in general. And if you've had the fortune, or misfortune, of growing up in a particularly large family, you could definitely relate. Not that my family was anywhere near as big as Lincoln's family. The show's strength obviously comes from its characters. Actually, that's a bit of a misstatement. The show's strength comes from some of its characters. All of the Louds have their own fans, certainly, but some of the sisters are certainly stronger than others. Lola, for instance, is one of the best examples of a bratty little sister that I've ever seen. Her mannerisms and her expressions just make her a delight to watch. And when she does bad things, it's usually because she's the antagonist of the episode, and as a result, she gets consequences. Unlike DW or Caillou. It's like they took everything wrong with DW and just made it work. Lola doesn't whine, but more importantly, she can be really devious, coming up with insidious plans to use those around her to her advantage. It can be delightful as the other siblings try to put up with her trickery. On the flip side, you have Luann. Luann tells puns.
Hey, did you hear the one about the thief who stole a calendar? He got 12 months! Get it? I'd say this prank's a little over your head. Seems to be your lucky day. I guess that's a wrap. I shaved the best for last!
That's it. That is the beginning and end of her character. I mean, she does do other things occasionally, but it usually results in her making puns, or making the audience of the Loud House hate her. Specifically in those April Fool's Day episodes, which we'll talk about later. The show can feel a little bit lopsided when it comes to its characters. Some of them, like Lola or Luna or Lenny, have tons of personality and onstage charisma. Some of them, like Luann or Lily, do not. And yes, all the girls have 4-letter words beginning with L, which strikes me as a mistake on their parents' part. I mean, I only had 3 siblings growing up, and we all had names of different lengths, starting with different letters, and our parents were still calling us by each other's names. Unfortunately, the lopsided characterization doesn't just stay in the Loud family either. The people who surround Lincoln's daily life tend to be a crapshoot. Flip is pretty memorable, as is their next-door neighbor. However, I don't think I can remember the name of Lincoln's teacher, despite watching every single episode of the show. And I couldn't tell you the name of any of Lincoln's friends except for Clyde. And as for Clyde, I have mixed feelings about him. First of all, Clyde has a fairly typical archetype. He's just the nerd with a ton of allergies. It's more or less Carl Weezer. But the bigger problem that Clyde poses is how much screen time that he had early on. Let me put this in perspective. Clyde was not in any of the shorts or the trailers for The Loud House. The show really pushed forward the big family aspect with the personalities of the sisters. The show comes out and the first few episodes decide to ignore all of the sisters and focus on Lincoln and Clyde. This was made a lot worse because some of the sisters really didn't have many focus episodes in season 1 because Clyde was taking up all of the slots. Seriously, the first 3 episodes of the show could be considered Clyde episodes. That's just really poor planning. The show did get off to a slow start. As we've established, though, that's a problem with a lot of not just Nicktoons, but cartoons in general. It took a while for even SpongeBob to get its footings. But getting through the first half of Season 1 of The Loud House might be a touch difficult. I can't say that the episodes are awful or even bad, because they're not. They're just slow, and they kind of seem like the show didn't know what it was doing at the start. It eventually found its way, mostly, and Clyde did work his way into my good graces eventually. He is the kind of character that only works sparingly, I think, but I do understand his purpose in the show. Sometimes you need an outside perspective to make a lot of these episodes work. You need someone for Lincoln to describe how it works in a big family. Could you imagine what it'd be like if people within this big family were telling Lincoln how things were done in his own big family? That'd be stupid! And it just so happens to be an episode of the show that everybody hates, called Brawl in the Family. Alright, so let's get this out of the way. The Loud House actually has a lot of bad episodes. Like, sometimes it feels like SpongeBob Season 5. When the show is on point, it's great. But the quality of the episodes can sometimes feel like playing the slots. I reviewed the episode One of the Boys in depth if you want to check that out. Let me describe the problem with that episode really simply. Lisa, the character who literally does studies on her family's shitting habits, has the gall to tell off Lincoln for being gross because he put his finger in a peanut butter jar.
Lisa, you always do your weird poop studies.
It's quite fascinating work.
Coming through! Missing piece of my gastrointestinal study! I'm only human.
Sometimes I wish I had 10 brothers.
And I wish you would not eat our communal peanut butter with your booger-picking finger.
And that's not even the worst episode of the show. There's The Greenhouse, an environmental episode that showcases how, if you're environmental, your life will be ruined. You'll start to smell, and everyone else around you will try to fill in the vacuum of your empty carbon footprint. There's the episode with 2 boys trying to babysit a baby that ends up like every other take on that idea in history. Oh, and there's also the episode where all the Loud girls, including the infant Lily, end up sexually attracted to Lincoln's tutor.
Color guard. Lori, you okay?
Hi, I'm...
There's quite a few of you. Friendly lot. Hello. Bit cheeky, aren't we?
That one was creepy. Put it on my top 25 disturbing cartoons list right now. However, when the episodes are good, they're very good. You get some very human moments of family, and some very touching stories. I don't think it's anything like Hey Arnold, but it's very reminiscent of Peanuts. As you probably noticed, the show takes on a very newspaper comics art style, and newspaper comics are a constant influence in storytelling as well. It's to the point where the Loud's pets are all named after famous newspaper comic artists. The show does really seem to invoke the 90s in its style and its tone, which is kind of a breath of fresh air. I'd say it's been a really long time since we've had a show about an average kid living an average life. It almost feels retro at this point. But it even goes down to the little things. Lincoln often begins an episode by just talking straight to the audience. That's not something people do in cartoons anymore. Once again, though, this can be a double-edged sword. The Loud House has so many double-edged swords it could probably start opening an armory. The style that the show invokes makes it nostalgic, almost on contact. Watching it can make you feel like a kid again. The problem is that not every piece of the 90s was great. This show definitely has gross out here and there. It's not as expansive as Ren and Stimpy or even Rocko's Modern Life, but it is like the only Nicktoon I think that has ever had like actual literal shit drawn in an episode. And of course, some of the messages that the show teaches can be very regressive, just like in the good old days of the 90s. Ronnie Ann had one of the worst introductions of any character in history. Honestly, I am surprised that she is liked at all, liked to the point of getting her own spin-off. Her first episode goes deep into the old chestnut. If a kid bullies you, that means they like you. This is awful! It is an awful thing to teach kids, even as a joke. This is the kind of stuff that we don't want to bring back. Yeah, sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's also true that people stalk and murder those that they like. Just because it happens doesn't mean it should be accepted or encouraged. Believe it or not, though, her second appearance is probably worse. Save the Date is my least favorite episode of the show because it is literally insane. So Ronnie Ann had been bullying Lincoln. Lincoln wants nothing to do with her, so he basically tells her off. But lo and behold, Ronnie Ann is the sister of Lori's boyfriend Bobby. So Lori tries to force her younger brother to date his bully for her own selfish ends.
How dare you you bully our brother. Only we get to do that. When a girl picks on you, that only ever means one thing. She likes you. Bobby is literally Ronnie Ann's brother!
Ronnie Ann has a brother? I thought she was raised by trolls.
You have to make things right with Ronnie Ann. Bobby has to see you being nice to her. That's the only way he'll get back together with me. Which is why we're going on a double date. It's all been arranged. We have a reservation at Jean Juan's French Mex Buffet at 6. You will make her feel like the most special girl in the world!
I'll go iron my khakis. Hi, Ronnie Ann. You're looking lovely this evening.
Yeah, this is the kind of show that has episodes that can make you really turn against a character. Like that April Fool's episode where Luann hired a bunch of stunt doubles to humiliate and ruin the lives of the rest of her family. The show has some of that 90s sadism where things could get exceptionally dark, and it doesn't really gel well with the more wholesome aspects of the show. These pieces don't go together. It puts The Loud House in an interesting place. I think that most people will like something about The Loud House, but it's hard seeing someone love everything about The Loud House. You are going to find episodes that you do not like with this one. I can almost guarantee it. Personally, though, I think that the good episodes are well worth the stinkers. There's a lot of good comedy in the good episodes, and they do impressive things with what are normally stock archetypes. Episodes like Ties That Bind or Undie Pressure are well worth shit like The Greenhouse. If I'd make a recommendation, I'd say figure out which of the characters is your favorite from the get-go and start watching episodes about them, and then build from there. Or you could look up specific episode reviews, hint hint, as there does tend to be a consensus on the really bad episodes like Ruthless People or Brawl in the Family. Then again, Butterfly Effect is one of my favorite episodes of the show, and a lot of people can't stand that because it's absolutely ridiculous. I personally don't like One of the Boys, and yet other people really like that episode. You know what? Just watch A Tattler's Tale or Ties That Bind. Those are good places to start. However, despite all the conflicts in the show, I think that there's one thing that everyone can agree on when it comes to this show. The show has to end with one of the parents saying, "Let's have another."
Next on Nickelodeon.